Guy goes to the doctor, and he says, "Doctor, I hurt all over. Like I'm in pain all over." And he goes, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Look, I touch my elbow and it hurts, and I touch my knee and it hurts, and I touch my head and it hurts." He goes, "I don't know what's going on." And he looks him over and he goes, "Dude, you have a dislocated finger." And so sometimes we look at life and we look at stories of the scriptures and we draw conclusions too quickly. Just like the guy at the doctor just assumed that everything hurt and it was his finger the whole time. And I look at stories of the Old Testament, particularly ones that we read about in the New Testament. And so you go to the Old Testament, and in Hebrews, actually, Hebrews chapter 11, there's a passage, we call it the heroes of the faith. There's a whole chapter here. And I've mentioned this before. Every letter or every book of the Bible, there's a particular audience in mind. There's a particular person that they're writing to. And so the book of Romans is written to the Gentiles, to those in Rome. The Hebrews are written to the Jews. And so the writer, which we don't exactly know who this is, he looks at this and he says, now listen, we talk about living by faith, but it's not a new thing. Sometimes we get this wrong concept of the Old Testament that when in the Old Testament it was what they did. And the writer says, no, they all lived by faith. It was always a faith message, and it was always a faith challenge. And yes, it's carried through into the New Testament, but it didn't start with us. And so you look at Hebrews 11, and you look at verse 4, you look at Abel, you look in verse 7, you look at Noah, you look at verse 8 and Abraham and a whole chunk up to him, and you look at Isaac, and you look at Joseph, you look even Moses. And so we have this picture of these Old Testament men and women who lived by faith, and God did amazing things through them. And there's things for us to learn today. And although David's not written in Hebrews 11, he certainly could. And when we're looking for a few weeks here at David and his life. And there's something that I noticed in this passage that I've never noticed before. Just like that guy that went to the doctor, I've been looking at it just backwards, maybe upside down. That I see and have noticed something in his life that I want to share with you. Not always, but sometimes, like today, I share from my heart. Now, obviously, I want to teach, and I want you to leave, always want you to leave with something. I want you to know something or understand something or get a perspective because of the content of Scriptures and the facts and the truth of Scriptures. But I also want to convince you. I want to be an influencer. And sometimes I want to influence primarily you. And today I want to influence me and you. You see, there's things happening in David's life, and there's a perspective here that I don't want you to miss. Let me give you the background on David and Goliath. It may be a fairly new story to you. 1 Samuel chapter 17. We're going to kind of look in and out of that, so if you have your Bible and want to go there, you certainly can. It all begins where the battle lines are drawn. The Philistines on one side, and Israel at its earlier stages on another. And once there is a taunting of a man by the name of Goliath, who is recorded to be 9'6". As I was laying in bed, our ceiling is 10, and as I was laying in bed looking at and kind of coming down 6 inches from the top, I wondered what that would look like. Man was just massive. And so you have this man in the Philistines who every day, comes and taunts Israel. And he says these words or something similar. You send me one man, and I will come down and meet him in the valley, and we will fight, winner takes all. Every day he comes down and yells that and taunts Israel. And Israel, the whole time, the entire army, up on a hill. So you just picture you've got one hill here, and Israel kind of looking, and then you got another hill here. Now, you don't want to go down and chase someone while they're up, because if you go down through the valley and then up, now they've got an upper hand on you. And so it's suicide. So you don't want to, the battle needs to take place in the valley where they both come down and they battle, and no one wants to go after the other. But there's another way of doing it. If just one man wins, and it's winner take all. And so he came down and says, send someone. And then he starts taunting the God of Israel. Still, no one budges. Day after day, these terrified Israelites, instead of complying with Goliath's order, they quake in indecision and they quake in fear. And David, being the youngest of Jesse's sons, hears Goliath's taunt in verse 23. And while on an errand from his father, comes to bring lunch to his brothers, here's what's happening. And in doing so, he can't believe his ears. So he's looking around and going, you're going to let that goofball? That's in Hebrew. Talk to us and our God like that? Who's he think he is? And so we have David who then goes to Saul and he says, I'll fight him. And he's like, well, you're all we got, but are you sure? And he goes, yeah. And so he arms him. He says, okay, if you go to battle, let's just put all this on you. And so he puts the breastplate and he gives him a sword. And before you know it, he's looking at between literally 20 to 30 pounds of stuff. It's almost like a bad, B movie, you know. The guy comes out and he's just kind of wearing you can picture like today, like a football player with his helmet coming down and he can't even see, and the pads, and you get this little scrawny guy wearing NFL-sized equipment. That's the situation. And David says, I don't need that. Oh, this is not how I go to battle. So he says to Saul, he says, I've taken down lions and I've taken down bears and I go after them and I've got a slingshot and I can do this. Now, by the way, you got to understand what the slingshot is. When I was a kid in the Midwest, when we weren't playing video games, oh yeah, there weren't any, we would have these slingshots. And of course, my brother was a perfect target for slingshot. No, in a good, healthy way. And so we would take these slingshots and we'd go out to my grandparents' house that lived out in the country, and we would just walk down and we would shoot birds. I mean, the bird that we were shooting was the safest bird in the yard. But we loved our slingshots. But it wasn't a toy slingshot. It was something that, it was two long leather strands and a pouch, and they would whip this thing, and they would become extremely accurate. In fact, I read, and I don't know if this is true, but it's on the internet, so it probably is, they could take down an animal 100 yards away. That's crazy. And so David, who has nothing but experience with it, says, I can do that. And the Bible tells us that he went towards Goliath. He didn't wait. He didn't dilly-dally. He went after him. And he went down and did what David knew to do. And that thing flew and hit him in the most vulnerable place, right between his eyes. One of two things. He died on the spot, or he was unconscious and fell to the ground. if that didn't kill him, most likely when he cut his head off did. And David said, done. And when I look at that story, and I look at the Goliaths in my life, there are 3 lessons. I've never quite worded it like this before. To not be confused, I literally mean 3 lessons that we cannot learn from David and Goliath. And you're like, why do you do that? The reason I'm doing that is because they're the most common that we hear. Now, you can make a really good argument for each of these. Like the first one's this. This is not a story of having courage and bravery. This is not a story of bravery on the part of David. David was brave. What he did in facing Goliath was brave. I understand that. But if I take that away, then the lesson that I'm learning in this situation is this. Okay, Randy, be brave. And then my response is, I'm trying. It's like saying to someone short, grow. I'm giving it all I got. I don't know what more to do. Someone telling me to be brave is like saying, jump higher. I have a pretty good vertical. You could probably tell. Now, see, I don't even say it and you're laughing. So my 3-inch is, I've not always had a 3-inch vertical. It's something that I've worked on. Being brave is the same way. So the lesson here is just don't be brave. There's another lesson that I don't want you to leave with today, and that is trust your skills. This is not a story of God-given skills, although he had them. At first glance, he said, I've taken down bears that large and meaner and actually stronger. In fact, the text tells us, if you read, that Goliath had an attendant that walked down the hill with him. So there's some that believe that it wouldn't be a stretch to believe that one of 2 things is taking place. That Goliath may not have been one of the smartest or sharpest knives in the proverbial drawer, but there's also a sense that he was a guy that didn't have really good eyesight. And I can make an argument for that, and I won't take time today. That he needed someone to help walk him, which is why he yelled, send them out to me. In other words, he's saying, come after me, come to me, because otherwise I can't see. In fact, there's a passage where he says, David, you come to me with sticks. What do you think I am, a dog? And he was holding one, and I'm sure David went, just one. So for whatever reason, David noticed probably some weakness in him and also knew that he was pretty good with a slingshot, and he was also pretty aware of the fact that he's taken down larger than him or as large. He wasn't dependent on his skill. So he wasn't dependent on being brave. He wasn't dependent on being skillful. And there's a third thing, is he wasn't dependent on being bold. Do you understand the courage and the boldness that it would require? He's not even in the army, and he's showing up with bologna sandwiches with some of the strongest men that the Israeli army could possibly have. And he stepped up as a teenager and says, I'll take him. It'd be like on a Friday night. The high school football team is out here, and they're getting slaughtered. And I don't know how good this team is. Maybe that's something that happens. Maybe it doesn't. But just hypothetically here, and a junior hire comes and goes, put me in. And they're like, oh, well, what do we have to lose? And before you know it, he's just weaving in and out and scoring touchdowns after touchdown. He was bold. But just like when God says to be bold or be courageous, you just can't just muster that up. Have you ever tried to muster up courage? Have you? Have you ever been in a place where you think, I don't have a place where that lives right now? I don't have courage to give. Because it's interesting. If you go back to the Psalms, and as I was looking at some notes this morning, I went to Psalm 82. Same guy. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of gods, he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Same guy. Chapter 83. Oh God, oh, do not keep silent. Do not hold your peace. I was in Walmart yesterday, coming around the corner, and one of our attendees kind of came around, and I noticed who it was, and I just took my cart and go, I'm like, whoa. She goes, hey, what are you preaching on tomorrow? And I told her, the general. She said, what about the woman on the rooftop? I said, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's my point. The same man who appeared to have courage, the same man who appeared to have boldness, the same man who appeared to have skills, the same man who was going to go down the hill and meet Goliath, 9'6", and face a man who had been taunting for probably not days, it probably closer to weeks, who later in his life said these words, God, where are you, and why are you so silent? And why does the ungodly not get punished? Why do you not judge justly? He's asking, where are you? And these are fair questions. It's the same man. Except he's older and he's wiser. And in verse 26, I see a clue. Chapter 17, verse 26. And he says, and David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine? Okay, there's something you got to know. While everyone else's eyes were on the height of Goliath, David noticed something about 5 feet lower. Thank you for that. And he realized that this is a man who has not chosen to live under the covenant of the living God. Not their God, the God. The living God. Let me just stop and tell you that you and I, who have a relationship with Jesus, are under the same covenant of grace. We're under the same covenant of protection. And we're under the same covenant of relationship. And I heard someone I watched a video and I thought this was I'll never forget this, just a great analogy of what the covenant is. It's like an umbrella. That the day that you accept Jesus and he comes into your life and you receive him as your Savior and you depend and trust only on him, he hands you an umbrella, and that umbrella signifies that you are a part of his covenant. And you have the God who created the world, who has the entire world resting in his hands. And he says to you, you are this important to me. He says to you, we have a covenant, we have a relationship, and I will protect you. But here's the thing about a covenant, is unless you live under it, it does you no good. And walking in rain and holding an umbrella to your side may sound ridiculous, but you and I will do it every day. And we have these promises that he's given us. And he's given us this relationship that's filled nothing with promises. And he says, I ask you to take that umbrella and open it. And as it is pouring down, cats and dogs, I'll protect you. And so what David sees right out of the chute is that man who mocks the living God is not protected like I am. I love it. In fact, verse 48, it says that he ran, in ESV, it says he ran quickly to Goliath. And I'm afraid what I often do, on a good day, I sit comfortably. And on a bad day, I run the other direction. And my umbrella is small enough that I can put it in my pocket. It collapses. And God says, open up the flippin' umbrella and let me protect you. Which makes me go to 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And it is here in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 that, I think it's verse 7. Look in verse 6. It says, your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, that you are really unleavened, for Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven. In verse 7, I said 1 Corinthians, I meant 2nd. There's a big difference. So we are always of good courage. We know that while we're at home in the body, we're away from the Lord. Boy, isn't that true? For we walk by faith, not by sight. Life in these bodies is tough. There's groanings and there's difficulty and there's challenges, and some of you are facing some right now that are bigger than life. And so whether you're David here, whether it's Paul 2,000 years ago, or us today, God is calling us to do something that sometimes I resent. He calls me to live by faith. And I'm so greedy that even when he does allow me to see things with my own eyes, I forget them within, I was going to say days, sometimes it's hours. David walked by faith. Here's the lesson. Yes, he demonstrated courage. Yes, he had skill. Yes, he was bold. I'll give you all of those things. But he knew that he had God on his side. And he knew that even if he ended up dead, God still sat on the throne. It's not a lesson that I've picked out of David and Goliath in the past. But isn't it interesting that sometimes we read a story that we've read 100 times, and like cream, God lets it just come to the surface. And you know what the message is for you today and for me? I'm up to something. I've got this. Trust me. And our response, oh, you just had me trust you on something else. I'm done trusting. And he says, no, you're not. Because while 2 Corinthians 5 says, while we live in these bodies that groan and that break and squeak, and then sometimes you get an age where they leak, God says, I need for you to walk by faith. I know some of your challenges, and we're up, my time's up, and I want to enjoy this Lord's Supper with you. But I'll tell you this. God's up to something. And I don't know about the church. At one level, I don't even care. All I want is us, 300 or how many, 400 of us that come on a given Sunday. I just want us so badly as individuals to walk by faith, not by sight. Because if we do that as individuals, we do that corporately. And that's why I want you to be a part of small groups, where you can be a part of a group of other believers who can encourage you in that process. That's why you come on Sundays, is it all week long. You look forward to this point where you can be energized and encouraged and inspired to walk by faith. It's just the process of walking by faith. And every once in a while, he gives us a glimmer. And my attitude should be, thank you for the glimmer. But what I've noticed is the longer you've walked with God, the less sight he gives you. Because he's expecting me, about being a believer of 40 years plus, to walk more by faith than ever. And I officially hate it. Hi, my name is Randy Williams, and I'm recovering from not wanting to walk by faith. And your response is? Hi, Randy. The band's going to play. Come on down, ushers. Thank you, you guys, for doing this, and for Howard for preparing. He's been so faithful over many years preparing this, and we love Howard and his ministry. And what this is, and guys, don't even wait for me. You can just kind of start passing it back. So what this is our reminder as a church. In fact, in the book of Acts, it's pretty clear, Corinthians 2, that while we meet, they said on a regular basis, would you just participate and eat and drink, eat bread and drink juice and wine back in the day? Would you just do that to remember that we're free and that Jesus paid the penalty for our sins? He came into our lives to rescue us. And more than anything else, he came so we could walk by faith.